Welcome to another Ginger GM production. My name's Gawain Jones, and this DVD I'll examine the Grand Prix Attack. The Grand Prix Attack is a successful sideline against the Sicilian defence, Black's most popular reply to 1e4. I've played it myself for many years, and I'm probably the world's leading expert on the line. A couple of years ago I wrote a book on it, and I've had wins against many of the world's top players, including the Dutch Grandmaster Luc van Wely and the Russian Sergei Rublevsky. The line became fashionable after it was used by Mark Heberden and Dave Rumans in the 1970s and 1980s weekend circuit in England, where they racked up many quick wins. In this DVD we'll examine a lot of my own games and see how many strong players have completely crumbled and collapsed against our very straightforward and simple attacking play. In the early days of the variation, the move order normally played was e4, c5, f4, immediately grabbing base on the king side. However, Black came up with a good antidote with d5 when we don't have a great move. If we play e5, Black will get a good caro-can or French position because he'll be able to develop his bishop out to f5. If we take this pawn on d5, Black normally plays knight f6, when we can keep hold of this extra pawn with c4, but after e6, d takes e6, bishop takes e6. Black has great play with a very strong square on d4 and a big development advantage for the pawn. This isn't the reason we play the Grand Prix Attack. Therefore, these days we play 2 knight c3 first. I'll just show you quickly. We play 1 e4, c5, 2 knight c3, and only then we play f4, cutting out this d5 option. Recently, the nuance e4, c5, 2 d3 has been tried by none other than Luke McShane, who is currently England's #2 player. The idea is again to go into a Grand Prix position after 3f4, but he's hoping that the knight is more flexible on b1 and may not have to go to c3. However, I'm going to cover 2 knight c3 because after 2d3, knight c6, f4, I believe d5 might still be a problem for white here.
Okay,
Okay, let's have a look at the theory on 2d6. So e4, c5, knight c3, d6, f4. And Black normally plays g6 at this point, although if he plays knight c6 here, it will probably transpose, while if he goes for an e6 idea, then we'll reach positions that will be looked at in the next chapter. So g6, knight f3, bishop g7. To start with, I'll show you the old main line. I'm recommending this nuance with bishop b5 check, but bishop c4 is a main line, which has also scored very well for white. However, after e6, castle kingside, knight e7, queen e1, you should recognise this from my game against Sartaj in the introduction. Again, remember that we're preventing d5 because of this x-ray pin on the king. Knight c6, it doesn't really matter when knight c6 is played, but d3, and now h6, keeping the king in the centre, used to be the main line. But recently Karyakin, the young Ukrainian born and now playing for Russia, very strong grandmaster, has tried castle kingside. And after f5, g takes f5, he's managed to repel the attacks after queen h4, knight g6. Of course I think white has still got good compensation here for the pawn, but maybe with very accurate play by these super strong grandmasters they can repel the attack. It's also worthwhile noting that the idea that I employed in the last game you saw of playing f5 first isn't quite so effective here before I play queen e1. A, because he hasn't castled yet, but B, because he can react with d5, attacking the bishop. That wasn't playable before because his bishop was on d7. Therefore, instead of bishop c4, I want to play bishop b5 check. Okay, so bishop d7. I suppose knight d7 is legal, but it looks very suspicious here. And in fact, a line with castle and dropping our bishop back to c4 is probably going to be very strong for us. If you look at this e6 square now, it looks extremely vulnerable. Or we may even have ideas of bishop c4 and sacrificing it, followed by knight g5, knight e6. Knight c6, then of course we take. So bishop d7, bishop c4. So again, the main reason that this is so effective is because d5 is hard to achieve. I recommended that it also is a very good method against knight f6, which an opponent of mine didn't realise, and allowed this e5, who's in a lot of trouble very fast. Whether here or after knight c6, castle kingside. Okay, we saw e6 in the last game, which is probably the main move. Black can try and exploit his extra tempo with the bishop on d7 with knight a5, hitting our bishop, when we have an interesting choice. Either we can retreat the bishop to e2, when I'm not really sure that this knight has much future on a5, and the best move is probably just bringing it back again. And okay, we don't want to repeat position ourselves. But we can play d3, followed by queen e1, bishop d1, and f5. Positions very similar to a classical Dutch, reversed here. And a very good one because that pawn is already on the central square. Alternatively, I've also analysed after knight a5 playing d3 immediately, which is very interesting. Our pawn structure looks ugly after knight takes c4, d takes c4. But we still have good pressure against this d6 point, so it can't go e6. While we've got good chances to get an advantage with a strong attack. He could try bishop takes c3 to give us the good old Irish pawn structure with b takes c3. But his kingside is going to feel very exposed without that dark squared bishop. I think this is definitely an interesting line to examine. One line that I had a look at was bishop c6, queen d3, defending our pawn, knight f6, hitting this e4 pawn. I probably should break with e5 here. For example, d takes e5, f takes e5, knight e4, and now we can exploit the fact that his bishop on g7 is gone and play bishop h6, keeping that king stuck in the centre. Now, black probably has to exchange queens, or else his king is just going to be stuck in the centre forever. But after queen takes queen, c takes d3, our pawn structure is much better. And knight takes c3 might temporarily win a pawn, but after knight g5, there's no way to defend this f7 pawn. And so I think white is doing very well here. Again, we've managed to keep an initiative despite the exchange of queens.
Oh, there you go now.